So, Tony, just while we're allowing people to join, we'll give it 2 or 3 minutes. But just because of the audience that we have and the interest, do you want to just talk to me for a minute or two about the overall regulatory and legislative world and how complex and how challenging it is depending on what sector people are in. Obviously, DORA, we're focused on finance, but the world of cyber regulation in general is it's moving at a pace. Where do you see the main challenges?
Well, obviously this DORA regulation is basically affecting the European financial sector. Clearly, it's one of a raft of other directives. You have the NIS2 directive almost in tandem with DORA. You've got the AI Act. You've got other PSD2s for the finance sector, amongst others, and MiFID 2. So the financial sector is particularly hard hit in terms of impacted regulations. And obviously that will have an impact on resourcing and timelines and deadlines.
Is there a possibility to pick a strategy that covers the core fundamentals of a lot of the regulation that gives you a central lane?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think having an ISMS in place, an information security management system based around ISO 27001, it would give you a clear advantage for DORA, NIS2, maybe not AI, but definitely put you on the right footing, about 80-85% towards compliance with DORA. So it would make perfect sense to leverage as much as you can out of an ISMS. I expect many of the larger firms and entities will be already on the road or journey towards that. Maybe the smaller entities, electronic money institutions, smaller investment houses may not be, may not have an ISMS in place. So it's very advantageous to have.
But adapting it puts you a good bit on the way. Okay, so
it's becoming ever more approachable and easier to implement with the latest version of ISO 27001, 2022 version.
Good. All right. Listen, I think we've reasonable participation. Good few people on already. I'm conscious that straight after lunch people maybe a minute or two late, but we might just jump in if that's okay. Today's session is, as the name would suggest, and it's timely, 100 days to go. A lot of people have a 100-day plan for various elements of work. 100 days to go to the DORA regulation becoming live. We just wanted to take some time out to take a checkpoint to see where on the journey organization should be, what it should mean to them, which is obviously relative to the type of organization and the scale, and what they should be doing over the next 100 days, conscious that people typically still have a lot to do, but where should they spend the time? Quick introduction, I'm Loman McCaffrey. I'm Director of Business Development for Ireland for Integrity 360, and I'm delighted to be joined by Tony Dunn, Senior Consultant in our Cyber Risk and Assurance practice. Tony, do you just want to give everyone a quick introduction?
Hi, Loman. Hey, everybody. I'm Tony, as Loman said, Tony Dunn. I work in the CRA practice. I've been here for nearly 3 years. Prior to joining Integrity CRA practice, I worked in the financial sector for ING Bank, where we faced a lot of challenges around cybersecurity regulation. Learned an awful lot there. I'd like to think I brought that experience into the CRA practice and to clients.
So this is an area that you've been living and breathing for a long time, Tony.
Well, maybe not DORA, but definitely, cybersecurity risk management, ICT risk management, 100%. Yeah.
In the finance sector.
My previous employer was very strong on that.
Super. So listen, I suppose anyone that's on the call has some sense of DORA, what's involved, and starting to think about what it means to the organization. But do you just want to set the scene, take us back to a quick summary of DORA? What does it mean, and what does it point to for organizations in the finance and broader sectors?
Yeah, thanks, Loman. DORA is an attempt really to harmonise many pre-existing cybersecurity acts and frameworks that were intended to improve and mitigate risk in the financial sector, particularly around digital operation resiliency. We've seen an awful lot of that with our clients, that operational resiliency is a is replace the old standard legacy approach to business continuity. Operational resiliency is where it's at. So it was natural that this, framework or this act came out and focused on the post-COVID world, where a lot of people, a lot of entities have moved a lot of their legacy systems towards digitalization, and Digital Operation Resiliency Act makes perfect sense, and kind of very timely, and will largely obviously focus on the financial sector, but there is an impact for, as we know, for ICT providers, both on a local level and even on the kind of larger cloud-based level.
Yeah, it's probably worth having a quick look at what entities are involved, do come onto the remit. But I think that's an important point, that even in the couple of years that DORA has been in the making, as the need has been understood and people start to prepare for it, I think the need has become greater. Our organizations are now realizing that having a framework, having an operational resilience framework, whether it's for governance reasons or just for their own as a business need, is something that can't be avoided. And I suppose what we want to touch on today is that there's good to be got from this. There's benefit from adopting a framework for, even if you're doing for regulatory reasons. It can be something that can get buy-in from the board. It can be something that reduces your operational risk significantly, gives people the ability to sleep a bit easier at night. So it's, while there's a big workload and there's a draw on bandwidth to tackle something like this, ultimately it's something that should benefit an organization if done well.
It's all too easy, Lomond, to look at these regulations as not more work, not another framework, not another act to be compliant with. But exactly, you can turn something what you might see initially as negative into something really positive. I think there's an opportunity here to maybe reconsider your digital landscape, rationalize your estate, simplify your approach to risk, find a new approach to risk, maybe, as the case may be. But I think on the page there we can see all the list of affected entities. It's quite obvious. Larger financial entities will probably have the wheels moving around DORA, but like your ICT third-party service providers probably getting caught a little bit out with this regulation, and will need to play their part and get their own house in order to remain in the game. I think we spoke about this earlier. If you're not compliant with DORA, there's a very good chance that you could lose your, not your license to operate, but your ability to interact with your existing client base in the financial sector.
And I suppose we've seen a few instances recently, Tony, where significant global brands who are ICT providers play an intrinsic link in the operational uptime of a lot of the world's financial sector.
Good point. Yeah, and they're not immune to incidents and not immune to outages, and that hasn't been lost under the European supervisory authorities that are compiling the DORA framework or the Act. That's why there's kind of two categories of ICT providers. There's kind of your regular kind of boots on the ground, providing switch IT services directly to you, but they actually have an indirect obligation with DORA. However, your large cloud-based providers have their own set of regulations and will be directly assessed under DORA, which is slightly different consideration for both those providers. Also, on top of the list of financial entities we see here, we have that kind of distinction between two ICT service providers. Your smaller provider on the ground who will be indirectly affected. That would, if they're looking at staying in the game, they may have to review their contracts, their SLAs, their obligations around testing, business continuity testing themselves, incident response, risk management. They'll have to play the deck as if they were one of these institutions.
Yeah, it becomes a mandatory requirement for a lot of organizations to say, if you're not DORA compliant, can you respond to maybe a bid for a piece of business? So let's move on to where we are with 100 days to go, and let's get to a point where we're thinking about what organizations should be doing. But just give us a quick summary of the journey so far. What would you expect organizations have done to this point? And there's no right answer. As you say, some more mature, more heavily regulated organizations will have a strong start already made. But I think for average organization, where would you expect them to be?
I think with 100 days to go, you got to be thinking, you know, what's your scope? Are you in scope or not? You probably are. If you're on this call, you're probably in scope. There's probably not many ICT service providers on the call, so they need to be considering their position on this, and they may need assistance. The best place to start at this point would be, if you haven't already done a gap assessment, you know, around NIST, CSF, or some kind of bespoke in-house full gamut of pillars assessment. We have our own approach to that. We can help clients out with that, and happy to assist. But start with a gap assessment. Look at what you have in place around risk management, incident response management and reporting, threat-led pen testing, operational resilience testing, ICT providers themselves, and then information sharing. So have a look at a gap assessment around those 5 pillars, which we'll come to in the next couple of slides. Definitely the best place to start would be the risk management area. If you haven't got an approach to risk, start looking at that. The good news, I think, on that is there will be a principle of proportionality. You won't be expected to create some kind of massive, you know, risk universe and assessment methodology. Nice, simple, smaller houses, smaller entities be measured on proportionality. So you can have a nice simplified approach to risk management. It would be sufficient. You got to start somewhere. So start there is a good place right now.
Well, let's look at the pillars then, and it's a broad topic depending on where you're starting from. But let's set a scenario of, say, for example, I'm CEO of a investment fund company based in Dublin with 60 or 70 staff, with 10 billion in assets, a reasonably strong cybersecurity posture, but a small team, and obviously resources going where they're needed. So we're not heavily resourced. Where would I start on? You know, being in finance sector, risk management is in the DNA, but ICT risk management is slightly different. So where do we start? What's the first thing you would be checking that we've done, or what should we have completed at this point, or be in process of completing?
If you haven't done a full gap assessment, I'd start with a NIST CSF based assessment, Loman. The reason being is a lot of the requirements around ICT risk management will largely focus and fall in very similar functions that you'll see in the NIST CSF 2 and even the 1.1 previous version. So you'll see the identify, protect and prevent, detect, respond and recover, backup and restoration, and learning and evolving are the asks in DORA. But you can see the common ground there with NIST CSF. So it's a very good fit for a gap analysis. So if you haven't already started one or had one conducted, look at that space, look at NIST CSF. You can download the tool yourself. You can seek assistance from a practice like ourselves. I'd expect the larger entities have already got that capability in-house and have already commenced that maybe as early as last year or into early this year. But if you're approaching the 100 days, time to get the house in order. Start there. Very good place to start. Yeah.
One of the things that I'll have picked up on you know, a light knowledge of DORA is that they're calling out the need for an organization to identify their important business services. Will that get picked up in any gap assessment, or where does that?
Absolutely.
Is that inside or out?
Absolutely. No, it's fundamental to the whole process. It wouldn't matter what framework even if you were looking at NIS or ISO 27001 or NIST CSF, you start with the risk assessment. You would quickly flush out your most critical services, most critical assets, most critical functions, most critical information, and start providing. That'll give you a very good place to start your risk assessment. Start with the top. Don't work from the bottom up. Start with a top-down approach to risk. Identify gaps in the risk assessment and start planning treatment of those gaps. Again, you don't spend all your time on 100, low-level applications or systems. You really want to be looking at crown jewels, intellectual property, stuff that could impact your reputation, your clients, the system, the financial system itself. That's really what a prioritized approach to risk would look like.
So when you talk about something that would impact your system, talk to me about, again, something that I'm picking up on as being new to us based on our scenario of, you know, a smallish organization. The need to look at impact tolerances and need to understand the impact. And
good point.
So I know a little bit about RPO and RTO, etc. What else do we need to be thinking?
Yeah, business impact assessments, risk assessments, RTOs, RPOs, all fundamental part of risk management methodology. In line with that as well, you'd also be looking at, you know, defining a probability, likelihood and impact, you know, table, a heat map. Clearly establish what's within appetite, what's outside appetite. Anything outside of appetite, you got to treat. You know, maybe accept certain things that are, you know, within your own appetite, but you at least start that process. Anything critical, you've got to be treating. Anything high, you've got to be treating. You know, medium, you may accept a couple, but that can be as simple as you like to suit, you know, to suit your own capabilities. It doesn't have to be 1 to 5. Yeah, in terms of the matrix and probability. You could do 1 to 3 and still end up with a low, medium, and kind of high risk category heat map. So keep it simple. I think the principle of proportionality will be taken into account. Larger entities will expect more comprehensive and rigorous type assessment and expect a better approach to risk. Lower level firms like your investment house or smaller entities it will be sufficient to have a moderate approach to risk that we just described. You know, low, medium, high.
I know it's something that's coming to light and that you'll touch on, but having done these impact tolerances, having done the important business services mapping, that's not something you can then put on the shelf and say we're done. I assume that needs to be continuously visited.
Risk is continuous. If you think you can, you know, put a risk into your register, it's high, and you're going to treat it, and you'll say you'll do it in 6 months or 12 months, and you haven't acted on that, well, that come 17th of January and you get audited by central bank as the competent authority here, that won't wash with them. That's a finding, and you've got an immediate non-compliance there. You've identified a risk that's outside of your appetite and you haven't treated within stated timeframes. I think you have to, within your methodology, you'd be defining, you know, if it's a medium, you might give yourself 12 months. If it's high, it might be a 3 months, you know, or if it's critical, it might be a month. You know, you've got to move quickly with the more critical risks, and that will be taken into account regardless of your size. Don't leave things, you know, sitting in your risk register and forget about them. You might need to set up a kind of audit risk committee, mini audit risk committee, depending on the size. Your frequency could be monthly, quarterly, but agree a frequency in your methodology early on.
And I suppose that points to a fairly obvious and basic fundamental that is true of all the pillars is the need for good documentation. If, you know, if it hasn't been written down, it hasn't happened effectively.
Yeah, I think that goes back to having good ISMS and information security management system in place. The first port of call there under ISO 27001 would be policies and procedures that are reviewed annually, approved by the board or relevant owners. And that, again, that doesn't sit on the shelf for, you know, gathering dust. You're going to be reviewing them every year at least. And I expect that would be a common approach in terms of the audits or reviews that will be forthcoming under DORA.
So next pillar then is the ICT-related incident reporting. I suppose it's something that people are aware of, mightn't typically have understood what constitutes something that needs to be reported to what level, pre-thinking about DORA and preparation. But is there reasonably clear guidelines around that?
It's evolving. I think the timelines for reporting are clear. There's going to be an initial reporting in 24 hours, an intermediate report within 72 hours, and a final report within the first 30 days or on the 30-day mark. I think during the public consultations, a lot of challenges around this, you know, depending on the size of your entity. It'll mean different things to different people. They may haven't got the capabilities. If you have an incident and you don't have, you know, internal digital forensics capabilities to define in your intermediate report, you might find you have to wait until your final report to provide that information. So that's where a lot of the challenges has been. You know, it's unlikely that the smaller institutions affected by DORA would have that capability and will rely on third parties with that special skill set. Larger entities would expect would have that capability in-house, either through, central operation operating out of the EU rather than, or out of Europe rather than in Ireland.
And I assume, as with all things regulation, it's not just the ability to report after the fact. It's showing that you're ready. You've some templates ready. You've thought about the process as to who will report, when they will report, etc. So central banks not just waiting for post breach type compliance. They want to see that organizations are ready for the inevitable.
Yeah, I think one of our common engagements is an incident response preparedness assessment. It's very frequent. It's actually great, to be honest. When I joined the group, it probably was a slow burner, but it's really taken off. There's a lot more engagement with non-financial and financial entities looking to do. I think it's post HSE was probably the wake up call. I mean, it's real cliche, I know, but really woke everybody up about the importance of being ready to deal with an incident. Know your classification levels, have a clearly defined escalation matrix, understand your RACI, responsibility, accountability, consulting informed, etc. The more muscle ready, you've done these things, the quicker you can respond, the quicker you can, resolve and remediate and actually recover from an incident. That will go a long way in the post, 17th of January next year. Having done TTXs and simulations will stand you in good stead, both in real situations, but also for compliance reviews and auditing going forward. So highly recommend.
So just one of the things, again, that from in our scenario of us as as a CEO and the board being interested and concerned, probably we're picking up that the need for scenario-based testing. Does scenario-based testing fall under the ICT-related incident reporting, preparing for that, or is it more around the operational resilience testing, or is it both?
I think it's more around the operational resilience testing. If you followed, getting your ducks in a row, if you've done your risk, if you've done your ICT risk management first and gap assessment, and you've established a clear approach to risk, you'll have identified your key critical assets. It's those critical assets that you need to be testing. There's no point in testing, a printer down in a delivery room and see if that's going to fail and what the impact of that would be. That's not a good scenario, that proves you're compliant with DORA. You're going to be looking at your, in treasury management systems, banking systems, targeted approach of an attacker mindset and what that would look like. You've got a red team, blue team, that. It's quite significant for I hope the proportionality kicks in for, larger institutes versus smaller institutes. The smaller entities wouldn't be expected to be having a massive program of work around threat-led pen testing.
So that's one of the things that the guidance implies, that scenario-based testing, it needs to be plausible and severe. How do you define severe? How do we obviously start at the top, start at the most severe, but what's acceptable?
Most of our tabletop exercises, we always pose that scenario. We say, tell us your most critical system. Imagine that's down. That's where you start, and you can work your way backwards from there. That's the worst that can happen. And that's what DORA wants to flush out. Are you ready to deal with your main system being attacked by malware, denial of service? You're down, you can't make payments, you can't make transactions, you can't process fees. That's significant. That could have an impact on the system. And we spoke about systemic risk ourselves earlier on. This is what DORA is about. It's trying to, isolate an incident to just a single entity, just a single platform. So you have to imagine the worst case scenario for you as an entity, and then try and contain that quickly. So the threat-led pen testing programs that will be coming will be significant. I think you can do 2 internally yourself if you have that capability. But on your third test, you have to go external for that. And I think the program of work would be around 3 years. You've got to do something within a 3-year window. So there's a bit of time on that one.
Okay. We touched on briefly, but talk to me about third-party risk. It's probably one that makes people pause for thought the most, because how do you control a vendor? How do you make sure you're putting the right processes around an MSSP? How can you show that you're doing the right things around that.
Take all your lessons out of your risk management, your approach to risk management, and prioritize your most critical third-party providers, and classify them, prioritize them, get them to fill in a questionnaire, just like you were, the 5 pillars. What have they done around the 5 pillars as well? Have they got a solid approach to risk? Have they got disaster recovery plans tested, incident response plans tested? Are the results available? You got to think of it like they're an extension of your own internal functions, and address them like a critical service. It kind of seems easy enough in a statement, but it's not easy, because if you're a large entity, you could have hundreds of suppliers. How do you classify? Well, start with a classification scheme. Say these are our most critical, and a lot of DORA is around the critical third-party providers. So if you start that process yourself internally, if you're a smaller entity, you probably got a smaller supplier base, but classify them, even if there's only 10 or 100, classify them and start, completing an assessment through either a questionnaire type approach, or get a third party to actually do that for you, because it's quite time consuming. Again, that doesn't sit on the shelf. That's an annual exercise. Suppliers will come and go. You may find there's a rationalization of suppliers in the financial sector going forward. It's going to be a challenge for people to stay in the game as a provider, and we have yet to see what that will look like going forward. But
so does that link to the final pillar, information sharing and cooperation? So if a vendor has a score that's suboptimal, is that something that will then get people will be made aware of it, to say this is, here's the challenge this customer has, you need to make sure that this vendor has, or is the information sharing not go to that level?
I don't think they divulge directly, unless it was really publicly out there. It could be embarrassing for both the vendor and the financial entity that was affected, if that was the case. So some of this will remain confidential, but I think information sharing is really, if you've got good threat intelligence in place, good threat management, content delivery, it's a threat content delivery coming into your estate, but you find there's an escalation from a particular IP address or a particular region or a particular bad actor, that's worth passing on to central bank as the national competent authority, and I think they'd be only happy to facilitate that. And I know there's some initiatives there around information sharing, ISAC. So that's really what information sharing cooperation looks like, and the central bank would be the best place to go to both furnish that information and then actually maybe seek it. I'd like to see maybe some kind of initiative where there's a kind of quarterly meetup, either through a webinar or on premise somewhere, and you can have discuss this in confidentiality, Chatham House rules. Tell us what went well, who's the worst threat actor you've seen so far, and what did they do, or what can we do to protect ourselves against that going forward? That's what information sharing should look like.
And I suppose it's something
not to tell everything.
Yeah.
You don't leave breadcrumbs out for anybody either.
Yeah. But I suppose it's something that we, in our role as security partner, try to do more of, where we're saying, here's the things that we're finding that aren't good, pointing out pitfalls, pointing out, that making sure people are learning from each other's experiences. So that's the 5 pillars. I do want to get, we have a couple of questions and answers, questions coming through. I want to get to them. But if we were to roll forward, Tony, and keeping with that scenario, so say we're in June 2025, I'm still CEO of this fund company. My CISO has pulled me out of a board meeting to say, it looks like we have a data breach. We have lost data. We don't know what, and we don't know how much. What should I be doing now that I wouldn't have done a year ago, or where does that put me? Because we'll have done reasonable amount of work to get to a level of compliance.
Well, if you've followed the 5 pillars, Lon, and I'm assuming in the hypothetical scenario that you've through your incident management, through your ICD risk management approach, you'll have identified the most critical assets. You'll have a list to go to. You'll probably have a service desk tool that's telling you application A, which is critical, has been impacted. You'll be working with your service provider, your security service provider on that incident response. You'll have gathered enough information to kind of, prove to the regulator in the post-incident world that you prepared for it. You followed all the processes around the 5 pillars. You've got a proven approach to incident response, and you're honouring the obligations of 24, 72 hours and 1 month. That will be taken very favourably, I would expect, from the regulator or from the competent authority, central bank in this case, and proves that you've done your best. That's really what you should be able to say in 6 months' time, that we started this approach to DORA. You won't get there quickly. We know that. It will be a never-ending, ongoing cycle. It's continuous. It's not, one stop and we're finished. It's going to be a continuous exercise. It will be impactful on resources. So you've got to find a cadence for this as well. So maybe come up with some kind of frequency that you can cope with your level of resources. If you're a small house, maybe every quarter have a DORA review. What have we done well? What have we yet to do? Where are we now, etc. So a good milestone type approach, roadmap of remediations. That will all be seen favourably, and evidence in a post-incident world. And I think the regulator would take kindly to that. And
Perfect.
There are impacts in terms of financial fines, both for the entities, 2% of your global turnover, and then individually, which is probably a big concern for a lot of the entities. The individual, members or management could find themselves facing fines if they're found to be negligent. But that remains to be seen.
Every cloud has a silver lining and all that, but that does draw back to something that we touched on earlier. This is an opportunity to get the business to buy into lowering its risk profile and maybe
Absolutely.
Getting the board. There's nothing to have execs listening like the threat of being hit in the pocket. So
what you learn, what you can learn out of I think we always look at risk in a negative sense. If you learn, you've approached to DORA here. If you implement a nice solid approach to risk, you can leverage that to pursue new opportunities and create value as well. So it's not just negative. What you're learning in this experience will be good for the business in the long haul. So if you think, oh, we're wasting a good, no, you're not. This is a good opportunity to kind of manage your risk. Some risk is negative, some is positive. There may be a new opportunity. Look at AI. AI is an opportunity as much as it is a risk. If you don't have a good, solid approach to risk, how can you pursue that and all the benefits that it might give you in terms of productivity? And when we see use cases in that, and some of our clients already who are thinking differently about risk.
Great. So just before we come to the Q&A, we have some questions in the chat. I'm going to launch a quick poll. Hopefully people are finding this of use. We'll do a follow-up session on a deep dive into one or more of the pillars. So I'm just going to launch a quick poll for people to feedback if there's a particular pillar that they'd be interested in going a level deeper on, and we can organize a follow-up session, bearing in mind that this is a journey. While people want to have as much done as possible before the 17th of January with 100 days to go, ultimately we will have to stay on this journey. I think, as you said, Tony, it's a marathon, not a sprint, but it does present opportunity to lower our risk profile. So I'm just going to go to one or two of the questions, and some of these, Tony, probably can be answered reasonably quickly. Some of them probably merit a little bit of a more detailed response, and that's something that we can follow up directly with anyone who's raised the question. First one I'll call out to you here is, so from a geographic perspective, organizations operating exclusively within the UK are not required to comply with DORA. Only companies with a presence or support operations in the UK fall under its scope. That's correct, but there are nuances to that. Is that fair to say?
It is, yeah. I mean, if you could have an Irish-based bank which is legally obliged to comply with DORA, could have a UK arm or a sub-entity operating out of the UK. I still think they would be impacted by DORA, maybe in a smaller sense, but I can see some legislation coming down the line from the UK that would be very much in line with DORA in the Financial Act space. Similar
there
to
seems to be
there
seems to be some information being gathered by the regulators in the UK just to try and figure out the right approach. But I think it's inevitable that there's there's a new regulation to follow. Is that the case?
More likely, I'd say, yeah.
So next, so there's a question there around the pillars, but one of the questions is DORA a self certification like ISO?
No, it's compliance. You kind of get your house in order, do everything in the pillars, try and do everything you can, as much as possible as you can do in the pillars, be compliant, come up with a gap assessment, look at it from a not implemented, partially implemented type gap assessment. You don't have to go crazy on level of detail. That would be sufficient in traffic like that. So yeah, you can kind of approach it internally, 100%. But you've also got to act on those gaps. You can't leave them and set them and forget them. So next month, what would that look like?
Yeah.
The month after, quarter after.
So that regular cadence.
Yeah.
So I'm just sharing out the results of the poll. So interesting cross section, but the one that's getting the most interest is the third party risk, probably followed by operational resilience testing and risk management. So we'll take that on board. We'll organize a follow-up session. But I suppose from our perspective, then, as a call to action from ourselves, if there is anything here that any of the attendees find of interest or anything that they would like us to follow up on, please speak to your account manager and we'll organize a potential assessment, gap assessment, or an assessment depending on where you are in your journey. We're only too happy to work with our customers and share the knowledge that we've built up, and hopefully that can accelerate your journey somewhat. I'll take it that there are no other questions. The chat is still open. Tony, any finishing remarks, any words of encouragement, just to help people feel reassured that while it's, there's a bit of a hill to climb, it's achievable.
Yeah, it's not too late. Best of luck to everybody who's on that journey. Well done if you've started. If you haven't, there's plenty of tools out there and plenty of providers like ourselves willing to assist you in that journey. There's also one thing we didn't cover. If you're bombarded with and kind of swamped with these frameworks, there's also an approach to that. There's new tooling coming out where we've partnered ourselves with another platform vendor in that space, and we can help kind of put them all under the one hood. Sometimes it gets too much. Spreadsheet over here for ISO, spreadsheet for NIS2, spreadsheet for DORA. So definitely, consider trying to put them under a platform. It'll be much more manageable and keep you consistent. I think it'll be a lot easier. It'll impact the resources in a positive way if you had a platform.
Super. Thanks, Tony. So, listen, I hope people found that beneficial. This is part of our weekly webinar series. We're trying to promote some knowledge share across all the various sectors of cybersecurity. And there will be running themes throughout it, but we're trying to share that across the various topics. We will follow up as we get closer to certification date, and even post certification date. We will follow up with additional DORA related topics, and it'll also be NIS2 subjects, etc. So it's an ongoing journey, but we're only glad to share a bit of knowledge. So hopefully people found that useful. Session has been recorded. It will be shared out, and please do reach out if you have any specific questions, or do expect a reach out from your account manager, who will just check in to see if it was worthwhile and if there's anything that you'd like us to follow up on. So that's all for today, folks. Thanks for joining, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Long.